Okay, we're back. So basically, over the course of the year, the BPs had seen a significant decline in the rate and overall quality of the code being produced uh, for EOSIO by Block One. Block One, again, is the company that basically uh, facilitated the ICO or undertook the ICO, collected the funds, right? And provided at least verbally and through many presentations a commitment to EOS as a network over a 10-year period. So the observation by the community, at least from those VPs in the statement, is that the decline was obvious after many of the senior developers for the network, who were the original creators of the code, they started to leave Block One and rejoin the EOS community. Notably, the chief technology officer Dan Larimer and other original core contributors. So they have a few contributors apparently left in terms of the technical development space, but most of those roles have been repurposed to focus in on the product Bullish, which, as you guys might know, is now open to institutional customers. And there was some apparent changes also being made to the EOSIO code from 2.1 to 2.2. And one of the key things to take away from that, I guess, release, this newer software, there has been some inconsistencies or incompatibilities between the release of the EOSIO code software and the considerations for porting that into EOS as a network. And it's my understanding that some of those changes are significant enough to cause significant performance issues for the network if they were adopted. So, in a sense, what I think the statement is trying to say is the latest codes have focused more on the bullish product, and not so much the obligations or commitment to EOS as a public network. So it's essentially like Block One forking away from the network and just focusing in on the financial products, which is, I guess, all in fine if there wasn't a statement about the commitment that had been made from Block One during the ICO phases. There's also a statement here about during the last 3 years, frequent conversation in the EOS community has been whether or not Block One was living up to the commitments they made during the token sale, as they were paid from vesting tokens. You guys got to keep in mind, this was approximately 27,400 EOS tokens daily. So, at an aggregate price, I'm not going to do all the exact math, but let's just say it was 25,000, and let's say the price of EOS was $4 average, that'd be somewhere around $100,000 a day. So not exactly a small amount, guys. That would translate to about $3 million a month, right? And several $1 million per year, and that could be devoted towards funding for developers that are exclusively supporting EOS and EOSIO chains for certain initiatives that we need. Um, that really didn't happen. And so, what the article goes on to say is that some of the failed commitments include not having deployed any kind of inter blockchain communication or solution that was promised, the 1 million transactions per second never being reached, and some alleged allegations of 1,000 dApps at launch, the desocialized social media voice and more. So it's just it's not something that I think what this article is trying to point out, and what this release is trying to point out by these BPs jointly, is that these deficiencies are not new. This isn't like something that was observed based on the negotiations with B1. This is kind of a history of many years of just an inability, I think, for living up to some of the promises being made. And so there are some videos in that release from Brendan Bloomer that kind of calls out what they were alleging to provide the community. And looking at where we're at after over 4 years, it's clear to say there just hasn't been. We haven't lived up to that. And so, regardless of where opinions fall, One thing that was always constant was that Block One was a key core code developer. And so once Block One failed to, I guess, at least in the BP's opinions, live up to that, the opinion about uh, B1's failure to commit to the community wasn't really subjective. I mean, there are clear ways that you can look at the decline in support. You look at the frequency of the EOSIO releases, the type of quality that we're talking about. And then one thing that was subjected was the frequency and depth of conversations surrounding the vesting tokens. And that increase in conversations occurred throughout the community. I mean, this started to become more of a uh, increased concern. And, at least in the BP's opinion, again, not mine, Block One's failure to provide the continued core code developments wasn't just a disappointing letdown for EOS, but all the other EOSIO iterations and applications and businesses built in or around these ecosystems. So it has far more reaching implications that go far away from even EOS. There's been other types of businesses that have committed basically to EOSIO as a software. And so now to see this type of fallout, there are some major implications here. And so the culmination of all these discrepancies and concerns really culminated in early November when Block One made a public press release statement announcing they had sold 45 million EOS tokens to Brock Pierce. So that's roughly you're not going to do the exact math, but that's a little under $200 million, right? Depending on the price and the variation of it. I mean, if you have 45 million tokens, um, based on the recent moves of EOS, that's somewhere close to a little under $200 million, and that was in order to launch the Helios VC. In and by itself, this was not an issue of concern. Um, the issue was that, of the 45 million tokens sold, only 8 million tokens were vested. So the 37 million tokens would still be investing for the next 7 years. So basically, what they're trying to say is because the original, they can call it social contract, or the way that EOS's token was set up, the commitment to, or B1's allowance of 10% of the network was really based on a vesting period of over 10 years. And so, because, we're at where we're at, which is essentially year four of this entire schedule, most of those tokens weren't actually theirs in a way. So what they were alleging here is that most of those tokens that were sold to Pierce were still in this vesting over the next 7 years. It actually wasn't theirs. And so through the current means of consensus, it was determined that the vesting tokens legally and rightfully belong to the network. That's their words, not mine. Block One attempted to sell the rights to assets it did not own without consulting the rightful owners. So I'm curious, really curious to see what you guys think. I mean, do you guys have the same point of view as this joint statement from the block producers or not? And so again, that was in early November. This around the November timeframe, this realization came to be. And so through the EOS Network Foundation, the network formally began engaging in discussions with Bloomer and Pierce around that same time, November 7th, leading up to an in-person meeting on November 10th. And the BPs, who ultimately had the governance power on chain based on delegated proof of stake, were kept apprised of these negotiations and provided feedback and guidance to the ENF Foundation. And so back and forth proposals ensued during the following 4 weeks. The BPs, they believed the most powerful statement that they could make to the market would be to have a statement from Block One, an external capital injection using the $4.1 billion of funds raised during the token sale. Keep in mind, the current valuation that's probably somewhere over $10 million, be used for ongoing ecosystem maintenance and growth. and this was requested on repeated occasions but swiftly rejected each time. The final proposal was put forth on November 24th, whereby the network would keep 30 million of the 67 million vesting tokens alongside a contribution from Block 1 of 2 million already vested tokens, as well as the transfer of ownership for the EOSIO IP or intellectual property to the EOS community. So keep in mind the use of some of the symbology that is part of EOS. Some of the IP is still under actually the ownership formerly from Block One, and apparently a lot of that got transferred to Bullish, the company, and so again there was some there is some issues there, but essentially this latest deal I described to you, where the network would have the 30 million of the 67, was if you think about it, a way of the network acquiring the IP rights for about 37 million EOS. Okay, so roughly, I mean, depending on the valuation of the EOS tokens on the day you look at it, that'd be approximately 120, maybe to 150 million dollars just to acquire the IP rights. This proposal was only a slight modification from what the parties left with when they parted ways on November 10th. Throughout the entire process, it had been known that Block 1 did not own the EOSIO IP, since they had transferred it to Bullish. Consideration by the network was always given to this fact. So this had been known since uh, early November, and negotiations and discussions had ensued. And so, some of the statements made subsequent to that, like this week, were a little bit surprising because I think the realization of the conveyance by some of the parties was they weren't aware of this. They had to go talk to stakeholders to get approval to basically release that IP back to the community. But to me, anyway, if you take any of this with any truth, if there is any truth in these statements, what this suggests is that these discussions had occurred way before the tweets you saw this week. I mean, that's going to be going on for weeks. So there were some statements being made from Eves mentioning that it had been quite intense, and the network wanted to get a letter of intent from Block One cementing this offering. Block One wanted the network apparently to provide the letter, which makes no sense. And so there was a subsequent deadline that was set and extended into, like, I believe it was late November. And so ultimately, what I think the community wanted or was hoping, which sounds very idealistic, is that they want to Block One to admit they had failed to live up to some of the commitments, and they wanted them to publicly come to the table and offer a way to work with the network to allow the ENF to acquire the EOS IP, and it would have been kind of I guess, an olive branch and a way of restoring some of the trust that had been eroded over the past couple years. And so I think there was some reluctance again from Block One to furnish that. So the ENF Foundation, according to this article, not myself, arranged for a term sheet, a letter of intent. And what this letter articulated was all these terms and conditions. And because it became apparent that Block One would not be doing this in a timely manner. And so, even though, according to this article, Block One said that they would be providing it, and that occurred as early as November 10th. So that's all alleged. Obviously, it's not to say that that occurred, but I'm just sharing with you what this is all about. At least, again, the perception from the BPs. The majority of the top 30 BPs met on the evening of November 30th and agreed to put a deadline of December 7th. And that was for Block One to publicly acknowledge the proposal while knowing that the implementation of the proposal would take time. No deadline was put on the implementation of the proposal, and both parties agreed that having the intent being made public by Block One would be satisfactory at that stage. The network had already made the terms and deadlines known publicly on its end, All that was wanted was for Block 1 to acknowledge and confirm that publicly. And so, alongside the deadline, the BPs started to deploy an on chain proposal. Basically, it's a multi sig that contained code execution for stopping the vesting of tokens towards Block 1. And so, that was a way that, I guess, from the perspective of the BPs and the network, it's a way to show Block 1 that the network wasn't messing around. And, there was this deadline. And, if uh, the proposal or agreement couldn't be made, that this would kind of be the action by that deadline. So it wasn't like this just instantly occurred. The ENF made it publicly known that the BPs would be adding signatures daily to the MSIG leading up to the deadline. That was something I actually did see and did witness. I'm not sure what privy of communication was given to B1, but I find it hard to believe they wouldn't, be aware of some of that. And this would allow for the EOS token holders to make adjustments to their voting should there be any disagreement with the process. So, for those that don't know, or maybe we need to revisit the intent of delegated proof of stake systems, they work basically on the basis of empowering these block producers to make some of these decisions on behalf of the network. And I'm not saying I'm a huge fan. What's up, Luca? I'm not saying I'm a huge fan or agree with all the instances of how the BPs act or how they respond to certain situations. I mean, we did see recently, several months ago, there had been a hack apparently. Network, some of the users had lost a significant amount of funds, and there were actions taken that I personally, as you guys know, just maybe being an OG crypto guy, I didn't necessarily agree with, and so I thought that on the basis of that action taken by the BPs, and this was even before this recent issue, we had already reset the clock in terms of how this network could respond to certain disturbances. If we would be basically allowing major hacks to occur, or what would be the activity or actions by block producers. And so that, in my opinion, set the precedent for all this. And that's why I find some of the remarks from the likes of Pierce to be somewhat interesting, because, and it's not anything against Pierce, it's just saying that I think the precedent for some of the actions by BPs using delegated proof of stake as a technology to control funds and assets from certain actors, a lot of that precedent had already been set, in my opinion, just based on that prior incident. Once we start to go down that route, it's really a different approach on how, I guess, how the network responds to certain incidences. And it's not bad or good. It just depends on, I guess, your perception and how you view delegated proof of stake, how you view the governance and consensus process. And so on December 5th, Block One made the token component of the agreement public. I think we all saw that, like, on Twitter. And the main thing here is that on December 5th, that announcement still lacked any public mention of the IP. So again, the network was looking for both the token component of the agreement as well as the transferring of the EOS IO IP. And so by December 7th, over 20 of the top ranked block producers made their positions known publicly and on chain, affording due process for the EOS token holders. And again, the way this delegated proof of stake system works is that, there is this signaling, if you will, or action that's being proposed by the network, and gives opportunities for major holders to reallocate or shift their votes towards a different action, right, that could occur. So if users or large holders of this network did not agree with the proposed actions, the correct response would be to shift votes towards block producers, entities that would fall more in line with the position that those users would have. We didn't really see that, right? We didn't see a shift in the position of those. And moreover, Block One failed to, I guess, in the opinion of these block producers, meet that deadline. And the MSIG was executed 4 hours later on December 8th at 4:55 UTC. And so this is more of that supermajority action. Some of you may not agree with it. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this whole situation. I think it's very interesting. EOS is a network, not even so much from a money perspective. I mean, we're going way beyond price at this stage of the game. This is more about, I guess, in my opinion, just WWE and probably one of the least talked about projects in the crypto space, just in terms of all the drama. There was some other drama this morning. I don't know if I really want to get into that. Pretty disturbing, if you ask me, if those allegations are true. Um, so it is a pretty crazy Wild West situation. So the actions by those BPs, stopping the vesting of those tokens to block one, was an action the network determined was necessary to express the severity and sincerity of the situation, highlighting the power of the blockchain to enable community to stand up against corporate interests that don't align with theirs. And I guess in this article's opinion, this represents the blockchain ethos and spirit and what are blockchains made for, so to be clear, and I think this is the super an important point to reiterate, there was no confiscation, no tokens in the block one account were taken, the account was not changed, and keys were not modified. The network is no longer paying, the bottom line is the network is no longer paying block one, they're no longer paying them from the EOSIO.stake account. And that is all. So, this whole notion, again, this is the argument being made. I'm not saying this is true because if you ask Block One, there might be a different opinion on that. And I encourage Block One to maybe facilitate open dialogue and conversations on this, on both sides. I mean, we've seen this drama, WWE go in the back room and have discussions. And all I got to say is, what happened to the idea of transparency? What happened to the idea and the notion of coming together and aligning interests? We're not seeing that. We're seeing very piecemeal actions by, I think, both parties. A lack of understanding of what information's out there. What is the actual facts on the ground? This is, I think, the BP's attempt to share their perspective. I have not heard from Block One in terms of a more recap of how we arrived at where we're at today. What were the actions they took? What is their perception on these negotiations? And it's clear. The other thing to note in this article that is also interesting is the article alleges that by no means is Block One being absolved, basically being removed from its responsibilities, as it still holds the entirety of the funds raised during the year-long token sale, as well as the 32 million EOS that have already been vested. I'm not really sure if that particular statement is true because, as you guys know, Block One has transferred. My understanding is they've transferred those assets that were raised during the ICO to a separate company, Bullish, just like with the IP. So, a sinister or a more pessimist might view that as a way that Block One has basically relieved themselves of even having the ability to fulfill its obligations. It doesn't necessarily mean that they can't be held liable, but now it's in the hands of a different company altogether that's run by a different chief executive officer. So how that could be resolved, it's still up in the air. This statement, the article goes on to say they must continue to fulfill their commitments made during and subsequent to the token sale. The notion that EOSIO IP belongs in the hands of a private for-profit entity and not in the hands of the EOS community does not sit well with the network. So that's why you're seeing the actions here. And it's really about determining whether BPs indeed represent the consensus of those with the most at stake. It can be difficult. In an ideal consensus mechanism, any decisions made by those given power by the network would perfectly align with stakeholder consensus. We obviously know that in this case, there are people for and against the actions that were taken, but this was the end result. And while there might be some that disagree with this action or justify the process, I guess the concern is that there is divisions and the means must justify themselves. If you believe in token weight governance, okay, which is a big if, The end is justified so long as the process was followed. So everyone involved in EOS consented to the process because of using having the tokens right in their possession and voting on the BPs. The process was followed. Therefore, respecting and supporting the legitimacy of the outcome is justified. I mean, that is a big if. I'd like to know again what you guys have to say there. And it's an acknowledgement that there needs still to be improvement on these consensus mechanisms. But uh, you know, and that was one of the big investments made by the EOS Network Foundation. So, and it's being led by Dan Larimer. But I don't know. That is a lot to take in. I think the negotiations are still sort of underway, although it seems pretty bleak. And some of the actions taken by some of the entities, such as Brock Pierce, and I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just letting you guys know. If you check the EOS Explorers, for example, there were about 3 million EOS that had moved from the Helios account, I believe, into Binance. And so the idea here is that those tokens could potentially be slated for sale. Okay, that would translate to roughly about $10 million, 10 million US dollars. And so a lot of people are questioning, well, if there's a commitment to EOS and investing in EOS, why would an entity do that? And so there could be many reasons for that. I mean, one reason could be that there's a desire to actually raise US dollars, right? And prepare for a crypto winter. Obviously, everything's pretty good right now, even though I think a lot of the early, the newer plebs in EOS are looking at the drop in Bitcoin going from high 60s down to I think it's now 50s or upper 40s and shitting their pants. That notion is really for newbies, right? I mean, this probably crypto is going to be around for a while. It's not unheard of for a company like Helios to prepare for a crypto winter. Having $10 million or having $15 million at hand or whatever capital they're able to raise or fund based on those EOS positions, that could be very strategic in the same way that we saw Block One during their ICO take on some of those funds, divest themselves, right, initially from the Ethereum that was raised and the Bitcoin that was raised, and then come into these networks, acquire those assets, and then garner valuations well over $10 billion. We could be seeing the same thing with the likes of Helios. It's hard to really know the latest. So I guess that's where I'll leave it right now. I don't really see any questions or comments. I thought I'd want to do this video and provide you guys an update. It is it's just extremely interesting, I guess. Kind of sad, but interesting. And Blue Sky here makes a comment mentioning it makes sense to me to stop divesting tokens. Nothing was stolen. Block One has not focused on EOS, and they've lacked communication with the community. And many people like Blue Sky, shout out to you. I mean, think that this is the next chapter for EOS as a community. It's a breakup. It's going to be hard. The patch is off. The band-aid is coming off. There's an open wound, but with time and with the right leadership, maybe the community and the network can bounce back from this. It's not going to be easy, and I don't think that we've seen the last of this fallout. From both parties, you could see more fallout from it. We know that there's some major token holders within EOS that may or may not be happy with this outcome. So you can best believe that there will be actions based on that. Some folks, like the likes of Brock Pierce, have alleged that the actions by the BPs undermine the integrity of EOS as a network. That's a little bit questionable because, again, you are dealing with a delegated proof of stake system, and so it doesn't really obey the same rules or actions that, for example, a Bitcoin network would operate in. Right? It's there's more subjectivity. You are giving up some of that security and empowering and hoping that the block producers elicit the best actions for you as a token holder. That doesn't necessarily mean it's always true. So that I think I find again that a little bit hard to believe that opinion. And there were some other interesting comments being made. One of them tying the actions by the block producers with the January 6th riots that we saw in Washington D.C. That allegation was made by Pierce. I do think that at that time it was probably when things were a little bit hot, on both sides of the table, and maybe since then cooler heads have prevailed. But it just shows you the stakes and the perception that we witnessed this week, and I think it's historical. Even if EOS fails, which it could indeed fail, this has been a exciting, historic Wild West week, for crypto, because really what you're seeing is the largest DAO. Okay, it's a decentralized autonomous organization that's worth, over $3 billion, right? So whenever you have a DAO, you're going to have certain actions that may not align with your interest, and then maybe that's why it doesn't make sense to hold or use EOS as a storage of value. EOS might be good for other measures. Having a DAO is interesting from those applications. So this is Phoenix. Just I want to give you my take. I kind of wanted to recap that article, get it out in this form, so we can digest it as a community and disseminate this information through different ways. As you guys know, I'm not funded by anybody, and the reasoning behind that is because I like to kind of just be an open voice on the EOS network. I don't like working for the ENF Foundation or the Bees or Brock Pierce, because I feel that when people are working for other people, right, they're going to have biases that, and while I have a bias of holding the tokens, I can proudly say that I don't have any allegiances to any of these entities. And a lot of the folks, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your view of them, okay, they're in some ways compromised. Okay, some of those ENF leads, they work for allegedly Helios, right, the VC. So my question is, how can you work for the organization that actually might have counter narrative or counter interests to the foundation or from the network at this point, given where the talks have been? I think that that's an interesting position to be in, and I would hope that those individuals, as they introduce themselves in discourse and conversations and in public forums and Eden meetings, they provide those appropriate disclosures, because just like working for a government, I mean that could be perceived as a major bias, okay, in the ability to make effective decisions on behalf of the network. They probably should exclude themselves even from certain actions for the network, because it is a significant conflict of interest. So I would recommend that the leads of Eden, and even those within Eden, if you are part of those initiatives or actions, there's nothing wrong with that. Certainly, everybody's got to eat, but I would just really recommend that they make those disclosures public to everybody to just keep the integrity, because things can blow up really fast in someone's face, and it's all interesting when the facts all come out. So Mr. Fatface says, or we'll go to Blue Sky and then we'll go to Fatface. Mr. Fatface says, I think this is healthy for the community. Should have happened sooner. B1 sucks. That's Fatface's opinion. And I think he says he thinks Eves was pulling a Chad move, sticking it to B1. I mean, it didn't come without its cost. I don't know if you guys were in the latest chats with Eves. I hate to say it, but Eves even alleged that based on some of those negotiations this week or leading up to it, I think there were some death threats. So this is, I mean, you talk about a story that just hasn't been followed in the crypto space, CoinDesk or Cointelegraph, or even on YouTube. I mean, where are the bees? That's all I got to say. Like, where are you guys at? I'm here. I'm showing up. Uh, where's everybody else at, having these discussions? You can only find it on this channel. I think everybody else, for the most part, is quiet because they're afraid to rock the boat, and they're afraid to basically maybe get their funding removed. I don't know, and so that's why, again, we don't like getting funding on this channel because we get to be an independent voice for the community. But it's certainly possible that Eves was pulling a Chad move, sticking it to B1. The other, tinfoil hat theory, which I don't really buy into, but some people are saying is possible, is that, this could be theatrics to prove that EOS is decentralized away from Block One. We know that there's a lot of scrutiny on projects right now that is coming forward. We saw, for example, Gary Gensler and the SEC this week put out some kind of a video that is now saying even that Ethereum and Bitcoin are not um, decentralized, I'm sorry, they haven't ruled it as not being a security, which I find to be ridiculous because there was the previous commissioner or whatever who basically made statements saying that those two projects were at least not expected to be securities. So it's a complete 180. The clock might be restarting on the regulations, and so EOS might be actually in the one of the best positions from a token network standpoint as being one of the projects recognized as not being a security, just because of the nature and how it was, uh, I guess, undertaken. How the startup occurred. Keeping in mind that the token sale was on the ICO using Ethereum as a network, the community spun up the EOS chain, right, independent from that ERC20 raise. So there is that, keeping the projects somewhat separate from a regulatory standpoint. It may prove to illustrate long term that there is value, in EOS not being that type of security. And Blue Sky says, despite coming at us hard, I mean, it is true. It's he thinks that we're being gaslighted into thinking stop investing was the most evil thing ever, and that's true. And there's a lot of misinformation out there as well about did the tokens even belong to Block One, or were they in this EOSIO staking account? So I think the allegation going around is that they were actually within Block One's account. And some other folks are saying, well, no, it's in the EOSIO staking account. So it wasn't even part of it wasn't a part of Block One's account to begin with. So it's all interesting, all WWE going on, a lot of theatrics. Is this WWE to gain more control of the tokens as well? I mean, who knows, right? But I think at this point, it's more for me interesting from a technology standpoint. I still continue to reiterate. I think it's worth holding Bitcoin and other types of assets, just given some of the headwinds we're seeing in the economy. You saw the inflation rate yesterday, tick up at 6.8%, which is probably an understatement of where we're at, frankly. So assets such as real estate, crypto assets that have proven themselves, there is a benefit there. Will EOS be a part of those solutions? It's hard to tell right now, just because of the fluidity of where we're at as a community. This could end up ending very well, or it could go even further south, with even more name calling and pointing. We saw similar things back in the day with Ethereum. We had a hard start there with after the hack occurred, and even some of those initial ICOs, it wasn't clear, how the network would evolve back in 2015, 2016, right? And in fact, at one point in the very dark days, it was clear that it was possible that the network wouldn't even continue because it was lacking some funding. So when you think about where the EOS network has been, starting from its inception, the idea that maybe there wouldn't even be a network that would start and run, the multiple steps that the community had taken to get the tokens. Remember all the steps required, and all the hurdles, especially for some folks in certain areas of the world to get their hands on those tokens, and the risk that was there. this is just another chapter, in that process. So for those that are still around, I commend you. A tremendous journey, maybe a hero's journey. For those that are aware of Joseph Campbell's work, maybe this is all part of the hero's journey, or maybe it's not. So I'd love to know what you guys think. I'll leave you with that. We are a community because of the engagement from folks like yourselves. Having these chats, having an interest to even talk, right, and see a face that is a lot more than just tweets. And then what I like to challenge Block One to do is show up. Show up. Let's see if Brock shows up. Let's not hide behind tweets and and different types of statements that are coming out. I like to see really I like to see people on camera. I like to see a real live uh, discussion on resolving this situation for the network and for Block One and for Brock and for all the people involved. So that's my take, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more of these, hit the like button. Consider sharing and subscribing to this channel. And that's it for today. This is Phoenix signing off, and peace.